From being a Ford icon to becoming an icon on the set of Starsky and Hutch, the striped tomato is not only cool, but it's also an illusion. It's not as loud as you might think. One of the stars hated it, and even the writers didn't like it at first, which is why they named it the striped tomato. Speaking of which, striped tomato was an accident. If you're a fan of Starsky and Hutch, then you probably remember the bright red Gran Torino as the striped tomato. But did you know that the name wasn't originally part of the script at all? You see, when the producers first laid eyes on the car, especially that loud red paint and bold white stripe, they weren't exactly impressed. Behind the scenes, they jokingly referred to it as the striped tomato, mostly because they thought it looked a little wild and mismatched for a serious crime-fighting duo. But that offhand comment ended up inspiring the show's writers, who slipped the nickname into the dialogue. And from the moment it made its way into the script, it instantly became part of the car's identity. And honestly, with a color scheme that bold, what else could you call it? Over time, the name started to smash that like button, just like you should if you haven't done so already. But no, in all seriousness, over time, the name stuck so well that it became just as legendary as the Gran Torino itself, cementing its place in pop culture and automotive history. And the strange thing is, throughout filming, the striped tomato had multiple personalities. When it comes to the Starsky and Hutch Gran Torino, you might be surprised to learn that it wasn't just one car playing the role throughout the entire series. In fact, there were about 10 different 1974 to 1976 Gran Torinos used during the show's production. Why? Well, the show's extensive stunts and dangerous exploits will have to answer for that. These cars were constantly put through the ringer thanks to the wild stunt driving, which meant they took on heavy damage over time. With all the fast chases and near crashes, the Torinos had to be swapped out regularly to keep the show running smoothly. As for the cars themselves, they were all equipped with a 3-speed automatic transmission, a choice that made things much easier for both the actors and the stunt drivers. This was the most common option on Gran Torinos from that era, so it made sense to keep things consistent for the cast. Plus, with all the high-octane action, having a straightforward transmission helped ensure that the cars performed well during those adrenaline-pumping moments on screen. So it wasn't just one striped tomato. There were a bunch of striped tomatoes, but they were all modified to fit the needs of the show. They were modified. When you're thinking about the Starsky and Hutch Torino, they usually picture one perfect gleaming striped tomato, but the truth is a lot messier and a lot more interesting. Production team actually used several 1976 Ford Gran Torinos, and although the goal was to make them look identical, each one ended up with its own quirks. The crew modified the cars heavily. They added those signature white vector stripes, pumped up the rear end with air shocks, bolted on chrome exhaust tips, and swapped in aftermarket wheels to give the car a meaner stance than anything Ford was offering off the lot. The stunt cars needed even more help, so they were fitted with higher ratio rear ends to squeeze out faster acceleration for chase scenes and hard launches. What's funny is that, despite trying to keep every Torino perfectly matched, the famous stripe didn't stay consistent over the series. If you compare the first episode to the final one, the shape and placement of that white vector stripe shift just enough that fans have spent years pointing out the differences. So while the on-screen cars looked like clones at first glance, each carried its own little identity, whether the crew intended it or not. Roaring engine or VFX. When you watch Starsky and Hutch, the Torino sounds like a street-ripping muscle monster, the kind of car that growls before it even hits second gear. And if you believed that sound for 1 second, the special effects crafted the illusion perfectly. Under the hood, the real 1976 Gran Torino was nowhere near as intimidating as the show made it seem. Thanks to mid-70s emissions regulations, even the big 351, 400, and 460 V8s were choked down to surprisingly low output. These engines looked massive on paper, but once you actually turned the key, you were working with horsepower numbers that barely pushed a 2-ton car with any urgency at all. That mismatch between size and performance baffled fans who assumed the striped tomato had the heart of a true muscle car. So, how did the show solve this issue? Simple, they just faked it. The production team dubbed in audio from older, pre-emissions Ford V8s, when engines had the deep, throaty rumble people expected from a TV hero car. So every time Starsky floored it, you weren't hearing the Torino at all. You were hearing a completely different beast mixed into the soundtrack to make the car feel alive. In a way, the Torino's power wasn't mechanical. It was cinematic, built from clever audio tricks rather than raw engine strength. Maybe that's why Michael Glazer wasn't a big fan of the car. Michael Glazer's hate. Michael Glazer, the actor behind Starsky, didn't just dislike the Gran Torino. He openly complained about it for years. He thought it was too big, too heavy, and too awkward to drive, especially in tight shooting locations where the crew constantly had him whipping it around corners. What's wild is how that frustration actually showed up on screen. There were interviews where Glazer admitted he would intentionally drive the car harder than necessary, slamming the wheels into curbs and taking turns with a little extra aggression simply because he wanted to beat the thing up. The crew couldn't exactly tell the star to ease off, so they just kept repairing the damage and sending the cars back out. All of the beating the car took on the set was probably worth it because the striped tomato was already popular. In fact, its popularity was starting to wane and the wave was starting to turn. The Gran Torino was already popular. The funny thing about the striped tomato is that by the time Starsky and Hutch made it a cultural icon, the Gran Torino itself was already on its way out. When Ford first introduced the Torino back in 1968, it quickly became one of the company's biggest success stories. For 8 solid years, it was the go-to intermediate model, selling in the millions and offered in just about every style you could think of. We're talking 2-door, 4-door, hardtop, fastback, even a family wagon. It was affordable, customizable, and packed with enough engine options to appeal to everyone from grocery-getting parents to weekend drag strip dreamers. But the mid-70s weren't kind to cars like this. Rising fuel prices, changing emissions laws, and shifting buyer tastes all chipped away at the Torino's momentum. By the time the 1976 model rolled out, the very same year the show made its famous red version a TV star, Ford had already decided the line had run its course. And what Ford hoped would become the Torino replacement, the LTD2, barely lasted a couple of years before fading out itself. But seeing how popular the show was becoming, Ford decided to capitalize and launched their own striped tomato. Ford's striped tomato. Instead of just enjoying the free publicity, Ford released their own factory-built version of the TV hero car. They produced a limited run of around 1,000 Gran Torinos, each one painted in the same unmistakable red with the sweeping white stripe, all built on the 1976 model year and powered by a 351 V8. They didn't cost much more than a regular Torino with similar options, but owning one meant you were driving a piece of primetime television. What's interesting is that even Ford's official replicas weren't perfect matches. The TV cars ran on 5-slot mag wheels, but Ford's production models came with Magnum 500s instead. That one detail became the easiest way to tell a true screen-style tribute from the factory's Starsky and Hutch editions. And some fans noticed that a striped tomato made its way on the set of another TV show. The Duke's Striped Tomato. What if I told you that the Gran Torino made its way onto the set of a little show called The Dukes of Hazzard? In one of the early episodes of The Dukes of Hazzard, a factory-built Starsky and Hutch-style Gran Torino quietly rolls into the background for just a moment before disappearing again. What makes it even stranger is that nobody really knows how or why it ended up there. There's no official record, no production notes, no insider explanation. It wasn't used as a prop, wasn't part of a crossover, and wasn't highlighted at all. It simply shows up, does nothing, and vanishes. Some think a crew member might have owned one and parked it on set. But it wasn't a striped tomato used on the set of Starsky and Hutch because all those cars had weird endings. The striped tomato has a weird fate. But before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you like the video so far. What's eerie about the Starsky and Hutch Torinos is how few of them actually survived the show. One of the surviving hero cars spent years tucked away in a private collection in Las Vegas, sitting in the Imperial Palace Auto Collection like some forgotten TV relic waiting for fans to rediscover it. Another resurfaced at an auction decades later, selling for far less than you'd expect for a piece of television history, as if no one quite knew what to do with a bright red 70s icon outside the context of the show. Other Torinos rumored to be originals have popped up in barns, garages, and obscure vintage collections, some restored, some neglected, and some with paperwork so questionable that fans have spent years debating whether they're genuine or imposters. It's so strange that fans still debate which Gran Torino is the real one. The real one is lost. Because so many Torinos were used and constantly repaired, repainted, or swapped between episodes, their documentation is often incomplete or totally contradictory. One car might have the right VIN, but the wrong interior. Another might match the stunt damage seen on screen but have no paperwork at all. Collectors, restorers, and die-hard fans have spent decades comparing photos, production notes, and tiny details in hopes of settling the argument, but the truth is surprisingly slippery. The real striped tomato is still up for debate. Thanks for watching. Here's another video car enthusiasts loved watching.